Okay, welcome back. Alrighty, so we're going to pick up with where we left off, and chances are some people had to leave at the break, so we might have to sort of reconfigure a few of the teams. That's fine. Just if you see a group that doesn't have enough people, go join them. And before we launch into this, I just want to say that this particular structure that has to do with shifting levels of thinking can be extremely powerful, and it can be a very rigorous way of developing breakthrough thinking. So this was developed originally to use in large corporations to try and get at what was missing in their thinking, what was keeping them from actually seeing new potential in the world. And so I invite you to actually dig in a little bit, see if you can work these questions to try and generate really new insights for yourself in this next little conversation about this, whatever it is that you're working on. So we'll give you, let's take the next half hour and see, that should probably be enough time to be able to play with this, work it, see if you can begin to get some thinking going. And then when we come back together, I'm going to give you questions that help you reflect on the thinking that you've been doing. So I invite you to actually do two things at the same time. The first is do the exercise, three things at the same time. Do the exercise. The second is assist your partners in your group in doing the exercise. So also be a resource to the other members of your group. And the third thing is be observing your thinking and the thinking of the people in your group reflectively. Right? Actually notice what's going on in your thinking. Notice when it drops into habitual patterns. Notice when things like what Tim pointed out about making it about them happens. Just notice the patterns of thinking and notice what it takes to shift them. Okay? So we're actually doing a task, we're assisting in that task, and we're observing the task all at the same time. All right? Okay. Find your groups and have fun. Okay, let's come back together. All right, so that was the first part of this exercise. We're going to do the second part. We won't spend as long with it. And then what I'd like to do is start a conversation in the group around what is happening, what you're learning from this, whether you can see value in it, and so on. But let's do the second part. It's with the same group. And what we're going to do now is look back on the last half-hour conversation and the work that you've been doing and think about it. Okay, so not about the content that we generated, but the work that we were doing, the way we were working. So let's get those questions up. Okay, so the questions are, what happens to the amount of potential I can see arising from these different questions, right? So as I go through the questions, starting with the first one and moving through, does the potential I can see begin to change? Right? Or do I see things differently looked through the lens of different questions? Okay, that's the first question. Second, what did I observe about my mind? Did it process things differently as we moved through the questions? Did a different part of my mind get engaged around different questions? And the third is, what would I need to develop in myself to be able to work at all of these different levels that these questions suggest? Right? What would I have to do to be able to remember and do this as part of the way I work? Right? First of all, and what would I need to develop? This is a really critical question. What would I need to develop in any teams that I'm a part of? Right? If there is value in being able to shift levels in this way, how do I begin to bring that into the teams and groups that I'm working in? Okay? So let's take 10 minutes to have that conversation with the same group, and then let's come back and report out to one another and start a conversation about what this is. Okay? 10 minutes. I'd like to invite now you all to have a conversation out of what we've been doing this evening. We've been kind of zipping through stuff. What are you beginning to learn or notice or think about regenerative development? And our starting premise is, well, this is what regenerative development looks like. So in what sense is this development? In what sense is it regenerative? And just what's beginning to be learned. Yeah, and what I'd like to do is actually put the microphone out in the audience, so I'd like to pass this back to you. And feel free to speak in Spanish. If we're having trouble keeping up, maybe Elias can help us understand. Okay, so this conversation is really for you.
I would say two things: the emergence of divergence and convergence. That's my learning.
Anyone else?
I realized, and I've been realizing this for a few months, that regenerative development always is a fractal of the work you do on yourself, on your observations of your thinking, your development as a person, and that relationship with your close ones, with your family, with your community, with your watershed, with your country. So it's always this back and forth development that needs to happen. It can't just happen in one place.
What do you mean by development?
One of the things I've noticed is that as you go deeper into understanding of each person's system, it creates like positive reinforcement loops that take you back to the first questions into deeper understanding of that question. And I think that's pretty much development. The development of our understanding of the other. When you can create a loop that takes you back to the first question, but on a deeper level of understanding and of depth, of course.
me, it creates hope. It creates deep feeling of being united through understanding each other, and it's a very empathic way of letting something that we don't know and it's a mystery emerge. And even though we are using our mind, we are also using something beyond us that is just expressing itself through us. So it's been very touches me.
I think it's creating and generating and building inner capacities in the system, if it's our system or in a fractal way, in order for the ecosystem or the system to thrive. So if we generate this inner capacity, then we're able to regenerate.
And I can carry also.
So for us was very interesting because we went back from analyzing what we are and what we are doing and what projects, and we went from different scales, and we ended up talking about how we have to regenerate ourselves and how we have to keep doing that all the time and question everything, because that's what we are doing here. We are questioning everything at every scale. And so I think that's what I get from these, all these going back and asking yourself, am I doing is, what I am doing is important, what am I doing in my lifestyle that affects also my projects, and go back and forth between all these, and it's a very interesting process.
Well, here we had very good conversation. I think it's like all these questions are opening a lot of new ways of asking ourselves what we're doing, why we're doing it, and by thinking in another way, you make new connections, and you start seeing and thinking differently, which may change things around the system.
I think all these questions were totally shifting the paradigm of ourselves every time. I mean, at the beginning I thought I was in one position, and then with the next question I was in another position, and then by interacting with the other members of the group I was in another position. So it was like, oh my God, all those parts of me are part of what I'm thinking, but I never realized that I'm all of that part. So it was like shifting who I believe I was in many senses, and then how is my commitment towards what I really want, you know, and then listening about all these other perspectives from other people, it was really like, yes, I also think about that, but I never thought about it that way. So really having a team makes you explode in a different way, because just the question for everybody is also transforming the people interacting among themselves.
I think I have a doubt about the proposition that this is what we've been doing, regenerative development. My question is, well, I'll ask it at the end best. And then what I'm kind of sure is that development would be, that we were doing was at least development, because I see development as sometime in Taller 13, they explained us, last Friday, they explained us La Campana de Gauss, the bell, the Gauss bell. I don't know, this thing that grows and then begins to decrease. I think that's a basic component of development. Development ain't eternal or infinite, but it has a time of beginning to die. And die not seen as a negative thing, but as a end of that process. I also think that development has the characteristic of having a clear objective. To that I refer to vocación. ¿Cómo se dice? Vocation. It has a vocation. I mean, that's an objective. So, this always, in humanity, I think, is born of the question of what for? All our actions, what for? What are they for? If we do not have this question in our lives, our development would be some kind of alien or mutant that I don't know, won't let us be this living, because we grow in this development and then we start to die in a peaceful way. We will always be fighting with that process, and that, I think, that's development. For me, that's development, and in that way, I think that's what we achieved here in our group. We were thinking, we were trying to find an objective and having a dialogue about it, a dialogue that get us to it in a wellness ambience. But regenerative, this word, I think it is meant to be for something that was there before, or that was in a not very good state. And at least we three, my group, we were young, and we have been through difficult times, surely, but at the same time we haven't been we haven't been elder or in death, and we've never been. And when we will be in death, we will never exist again. And I don't know. Regenerative, I think, is something external to us in this way. So my question would be, I explained what was development to me, and my question would be, what are we referring with regenerative? Am I regenerating myself?
I'll take that up in a little bit. Anybody else have anything they want to add about this last chunk of work?
Okay, it's very quickly. I think that regeneration is in us. So these questions let us know that. So that's the way that we can go.
Tell us how you came to that.
How?
Tell us what caused you to see it that way.
Because I see it like this. I know the peace, for example. The peace has to be in a community. And if we have a problem, always we are like very individual. So, but we have the problem, we have the problem, the same problem, but we don't know that. So if we think about that, we think about in a team, so everybody is going to be going to that answer.
Would anybody else have something they'd like to add?
Okay, I'm going to do a little digression because of sort of the question that you asked and the way that you were beginning to respond to it. This is why I'm glad we had sheets here. So the question was, if we see regeneration as bringing something back to a state that it was before, then it's hard to see how this is regeneration. Generally, the way I look at that is that that describes restoration, right? So ecological restoration is a whole field that has to do with trying to figure out what condition a forest was in at a certain time and bring it back to that condition, right? Restoring an old painting has to do with trying to bring it back to the condition that's closer to what it was like when it was new. Regeneration has more to do with discovering new, this is the way I hold it, it has to do with discovering new potential in something that still hasn't been realized. Okay? So regeneration has to do with seeing what this could become that it hasn't had an opportunity to become yet.
Ever.
Sorry?
Ever.
Ever, yeah. There's always more potential, right? And as one moves into a new level of potential, new potential opens up, right? In a way, it's a way of describing the driver by which systems evolve, right? They're continuously becoming more complex, more diverse, more rich. The connections within them more profound, and resilient, and so on. And so regeneration has to do with seeing something that doesn't yet exist, but that could, right? So one of the ways that, there are many, many ways of talking about that and thinking about that. We've been playing with two of them. One of them is a framework that you'll see in just a minute. The other is a very simplistic framework that I'm going to put up on the board. It's really simple. Call it the line. And the idea is that there is work that happens above the line and below the line. Right? And work that happens below the line has to do with basically maintaining order, right? Keeping a system from falling into disorder, right? So if you think about it, what would be an example of work that's intended to maintain the order of something?
A hospital.
A hospital?
A policeman
Right.
also.
Sorry?
You work as a policeman.
A policeman. Okay.
The health system.
The entire healthcare system, right? Okay. So it's like, here we are going along and we get sick, right? What is it going to take to get us back up to the line, right? Here we are going along and suddenly we have burglaries or crime, right? What do we have to do to get us back up to the line, right? Here we are and we've got pollution. You know, what kind of laws do we have to do? What kind of changes in, air pollution control standards? What kind of, the vast majority of the environmental movement, and particularly environmental law and policy, has to do with the fact that over centuries, we've gone from here to here, and we're trying to slowly crawl our way back up. Right? And in a perfect universe, we would get back to where we were doing almost no harm at all. So that the upper threshold of what we can imagine when we're working below the line is harmlessness. Right? Above the line has to do with what's possible. Right? Not how do we fix what exists. So this is existence. This is potential. And if you think about it, virtually everything that we build into our governance systems, our legal systems, our systems for managing sewage, air quality, organic food, it's all down here about dealing with the problems that exist and how to fix them. Right? Potential happens when someone has a radically new idea, right, and goes for a new possibility. So what's behind those questions, if you think about it, the first two questions have to do with managing existence. What are all the operations that I have to pay attention to that exist, that if I forget about them, the thing will start to fall apart, right? And how do I have to manage myself so that I can be effective at doing all of that work, right? So I don't blow my cool or give up, get burned out. What do I have to do to make sure that this continues to get more and more effective? The last two questions had to do with, no, how do we begin dreaming a different future? Right? There's no reason for this not to be the beautiful place that it has the full potential to be. There's no reason at all. There's no reason why we can't dream that and collectively go to work on it. There's no reason why human beings have to be a cancer on planet Earth. There is no reason. Right? We can have a different dream.
How do you distinguish between potentials? How do you know which potential is the one that resonates with the beauty of the sea?
That's such a Pablo question. That is a personal development question, right? We've been playing tonight, right, around developing ourselves, right, developing relationships with others so that we can develop a different nature of city, right, different nature of watershed, different nature of outcome, right? Learning how to, actually, I would love it. I'm going to turn the microphone over to Raul because he was getting an insight out of the last exercise, just watching and listening. He got an insight about what it means really deeply to shift your relationship to a place, right? So the personal development dimension, Pablo, has to do with what do I need to grow in myself to be able to hear differently, right? What's being called for, right? It's not about me, ultimately. It's about it's about vocation, the word the gentleman in the back used, right? What am I called to do?
You could be wrong.
Of course.
No, not you. I mean, you
We all do all the time.
Vocation for a place.
We all do all the time. That's natural, right? It's what do we set our heart on and learn how to do better that's important. Yeah? But let me just invite you to share what you were talking about earlier.
Thank you. I'll say it in Spanish. La segunda pregunta de la lámina que tenía tres, que teníamos que identificar lo que nos limitaba. Y lo que le comentaba yo a Ben es que el ver esa limitación era una manifestación de la esencia del lugar, no era en realidad una limitación, y que también podríamos nosotros ser la limitación de la vocación del lugar. Entonces podría invertir, entonces dependía de cómo podemos nosotros ver eso.
Okay, all this is a setup. So let's put up the next slide. Okay, so I said there was another framework behind that first set of questions we asked, right? That had to do with what am I really caring about? How do I see the restraints that are being presented back to me in a more creative way? And can I come up with a new insight about what I should be pursuing, right? So that is mappable against this same framework, right? That what activates me is what I'm really caring about. That it gets me out of bed in the morning, it gets me to stand up in front of you all and talk, and gets all of us to do what we care about. But the irony about activation is if it doesn't meet resistance, right, it can't actually get work done, right? This is true throughout natural systems. Through all of nature, resistance is what creates work. Resistance is what creates transformation, change, new possibility. So evolution is the manifestation of activating forces meeting resistance. Right? The building of soil, the growing of trees, all of those things are activating forces meeting resistance. a classic story that's told to describe what this is about is if a potter has in mind a beautiful vase. She wants to make an extraordinarily beautiful vase, right? And she knows what it looks like in her mind, right? She has to encounter the clay, right? And the clay has a mind of its own. If you've ever worked in clay, it has its own personality, it has its own restraints, it has its own potential, right? Some clays, if you heat them very hot, they'll melt. Other clays, if you don't heat them hot enough, they'll fall apart. So every clay has its own particular character, right? And so the potter, with her image, needs to really encounter and work with the reality of the clay for a vase to appear. And the vase will be the result of the collaboration between the two. Right? It is not the fantasy we hold in our minds. It's how we bring our will and our commitment to the realities of the world that results in something new coming in. Right? So this is a way of describing that process. Another way of describing it is known in psychology as cognitive dissonance. Right? So in order to have a creative breakthrough or creative insight, cognitive dissonance is necessary. That is, I need to be working on a problem, right, that is so challenging that, that just hanging out with the challenge is what creates the breakthrough insight. Einstein described this, that Einstein was borderline autistic, right? And so he was able to hang on to a problem that couldn't be solved for a very, very, very long time. He was able to sit in the discomfort of cognitive dissonance for very long periods of time. And that's what allowed these huge intellectual breakthroughs that he was capable of. Any artist knows this experience, right? They know what they want to try to do, right? And they have to hang out with the restraints that prevent them from doing that, to have the really great painting or the really great sculpture or the really great piece of architecture or design come through, right? You're an urban planner, right? Are you familiar with this, like, struggling with the question process? Everyday experience. Yeah. So many of us are designers. This is in some way familiar, right? So the idea is that for really creative work to happen, three forces have to be present. What's getting activated, what we're trying to manifest, what's restraining it, which we have to value, right? We have to respect it and value it, not feel like it's getting in our way. And the willingness to be open to something coming through that is of a higher order than what we started with, right? The way, I don't know here in Mexico, but in the United States, we are trained from very young to deal with this situation in a very different way, right? Which we call compromise. Right? So, I want to do this, you're trying to prevent me, let's work it out, right? I'll give up this, we'll give up some of that, maybe I'll do a little bit, and we'll work this, and we'll negotiate that, I'll pay you this much money, you'll do this, right? And somehow we end up with something that both of us can live with, but that is worse than either of us wanted, right? And that takes the whole thing down. It's the willingness to hang out in the discomfort of this back and forth that actually yields to something new and more valuable, right? But the secret to it is actually being able to shift levels, right? Which is what we were just playing with. We were playing with how do you shift levels in the mind, and we just gave one example of it with those 4 questions. But the key to this is you can't solve the problem. This is another Einstein quote. He says, you cannot solve the problem at the level at which it was created. Right? If you keep trying to work it, it's like you're on a game board, right? You're trying to work it out on the game board, and if you stay on the game board, the big problems will never get solved, right? You have to get off the game board. You have to see a whole new world. Whether that's like a more complicated system that you're nested in, or a different level, like moving from thinking that it's really about the operational issues and not realizing that it's more about me, and so on. Okay? So, given all that, that's kind of the background to what we've been doing. We threw together this to describe what we're excited about right now with regard to Ibero and the work here in Mexico. The last few years, we spent a lot of time working on the potential for the Cuenca. Okay, we realized that Mexico City is not the right way to define what this is about. It's really the whole watershed, which is a great basin, that drained down to create the lakes on which Mexico is founded and so on. So that still exists. We're inside of this extraordinary basin, the Cuenca. And it has, if you look at it out at that scale, it has extraordinary potential, right? And we played a little bit in various workshops and conversations on what that potential might be. And that's starting to bubble up in proposals like Rio de la Piedad and various other things, stuff that's going on in Valle de Bravo. Okay? What's restraining it, one way of looking at what's restraining it, is this place is such high energy that its tendency is always to move towards chaos. It's the I mean, I haven't lived in some places in Asia, but it is an intensely chaotic place. Right? Yes or no?
Yeah.
Oh, just checking. I mean, I couldn't, there's no way that I would dare drive in this town. These two guys have always driven, and it's like, I just close my eyes and wait till we get there. So it's intense for an outsider. So that's like the restraining force. No matter what you try to get organized and try and get going, it's chaotic, right? And it's very hard to manage that chaos. But that it's pure energy, right? Incredible amount of energy. It's amazing what can flash through the city, right? So up at the reconciling idea, this has just shown up very, very recently. A year ago, I would not have even thought that this was possible. And yet there seems to be a kind of critical mass that's showing up now here of people who have been working inside of Ibero, working with us, talking about this, talking to their friends, organizing projects and so on, to where it is possible to imagine a group that comes together around developing its ability to engage in regenerative practice. Right? This is right at the beginning of this. So, would it be possible to create a kind of very loose affiliation or team of people from lots of different backgrounds, lots of different disciplines, but all of them wanting to get really good at this thing of shifting levels in order to create really powerfully creative new approaches and new solutions, right? So we're actually, some of you have probably heard, we're about to start a workshop the next 3 days where we're going to be getting together with a group of people who want to explore that idea, figure out what would be involved in it, figure out how to do it. In other words, how to create a kind of support network and community that can begin to train one another and start to build like the critical mass to start shifting things here. The picture I hold of this is that the shifts that are being talked about in this community are not going to happen through a top-down approach, right? Or not only through a top-down approach. It can be helpful to have somebody in place, you know, as the governor or even as the president who's enthusiastic and supportive. It can be helpful, but it's not critical, right? That what's much more important is that there's a kind of group of people with the energy and spirit to hold out this image of what this place could become, and doing that through the media, through networking with NGOs and businesses and whoever, that through that holding out a vision for it, that all kinds of things will spontaneously begin to organize themselves and pop up. And we've already seen that happen here, just through small interactions like this one. A little lecture or a little workshop, and for months stuff starts to build and things start to happen. So what would it take to move us from kind of doing it in an ad hoc way into doing it in a very sustained way, where that group gets better and better and better at generating that kind of spontaneous arising of projects, activities, opportunities, education, whatever it takes. Okay? So what I'd like to do is, again, turn the microphone over to you all to talk about what value that might contribute You know, if something like that, if there was a kind of ongoing process, and an ongoing group really working on this, what value might that be able to contribute to the work that you're doing that you really care about? Right? Because that helps shape the thinking about what this group would need to be. Okay? So I invite you to sort of share, is there value in it, and if so, what might it be? Anybody want to speak to that?
Well, to begin with, I think networks and interdiscipline, because I think I come from public university, national. I don't know about here, but over there, we're not really into interdisciplinary thought yet. I think mainly because our teachers are kind of old, maybe, but we're not very used to working in a team.
I said that was ageist.
I think it's more like spiritually old, you know? It's not really a question of age. I lost kind of my track. Oh yeah, so we're not used to working and like speaking different languages, right? Conceptual languages. So I think one benefit would be interdisciplinary kind of networking and helping each other out in like translating what the biologist is saying into the terms of maybe architects or whatever. That's one thing. And then inspiration, I think sometimes you forget that there's other people also thinking that it is possible, right? And so just the fact that having this kind of, it's like double A, you know, every week you go and you see that the other people are also tuned into your idea, and that gets you through the holes on the road. So inspiration and interdisciplinary networking are my two, I think. Yeah.
I think that it would give congruencia, coherence to what every individual is doing, and that would give, at least for me, it contains my process just to be around like-minded individuals that are having maybe different goals, personal goals, but we are all having a holistic goal, which is to improve the quality of life within the country, and that gives me peace if we would do that. So I would be really up for it.
Maybe Jorge, would you be willing to speak to whether you could see any value in the ongoing development of this kind of work for this community of city? And what that might be in terms of what you work on?
Well, I prefer to speak in Spanish.
Please.
Well, bueno, estábamos hablando hace un momento de precisamente esto, ¿no? Antes de ver esta lámina, cómo nos tenemos que confrontar con las restricciones cuando estamos tratando de potencializar a través de un proyecto o a través de una actividad. Y es un proceso que decíamos tiene varias etapas. Hay una frase que dice que aceptar es liberarse. ¿Sí? Y cómo puede uno aceptar una realidad que no tiene que ver con uno en absoluto en cuanto a sus intenciones, en cuanto a lo que uno está buscando. Entonces, ¿cómo logra uno compaginar esa restricción? Nuestro país está pasando por una situación muy parecida. Vemos que es un gran potencial y que tenemos unas restricciones pavorosas. Entonces, ¿cómo podríamos en nuestro trabajo cotidiano como comunidad lograr esa reconciliación? Tiene que pasar por una etapa de aceptación, ¿no? Y en este proceso de aceptación creo que nos liberamos de esa restricción internamente, pero no creo que por liberarnos de ella de una manera emocional o espiritual quiere decir que va a suceder lo que yo quiero. Yo creo que al final de cuentas las cosas que suceden son lo que es la vida, lo que es la realidad, ¿no? Es decir, mi duda es, ahí está el potencial, pero no quiere decir que ese potencial se vaya a dar. Entonces, ¿cómo puedo trabajar yo sin apegarme a ese potencial que yo vislumbro? Entonces tengo que hacer un trabajo más allá de la esperanza. Es como saber que uno tiene que hacer las cosas porque las tiene que hacer, pero no porque crea uno que el mundo va a ser como yo creo que tiene que ser. Entonces, la parte regenerativa interna de aceptar, de asumir que la realidad es así, la puede uno poner ante los demás, ante la actividad cotidiana, y hay una especie de dejarla libre, ¿no? No de apegarme a que eso va a ser, ¿no? Es como un acto que va más allá de la intención, que es un acto desinteresado y desapegado. Creo que esa es una actitud regenerativa, porque al final la naturaleza es gratis, es gratuita, se nos da sin pedirnos nada, ¿no? Ahí está. Y creo que nosotros tendríamos que ser así también, dar sin pedir nada, ¿no? Y así muy sofisticada la cosa, ¿no? Es decir, el trabajo regenerativo yo creo que es un trabajo desinteresado, no hay un interés. Sí, hay una intención, pero no hay un interés de que así tiene que ser, porque si no perderías el misterio de la vida, ¿no?
So for me, it's like remembering that quote, but never doubt that a small group of people can change the world, because in fact that's the only thing that has ever changed the world, or transformed the world, however you want to put it. My point is, in Mexico, we're so used to blame it on the government and blame it on somebody else, and I think having a group of people that will be working on themselves and getting empowered by the fact that you can envision a better world, and there's a group that is kind of reinforcing that attitude, is just amazing. So it's so worth it and super valuable to empower every single person that can take the chance and the opportunity that you're bringing here to really feel inspired and feel, you know, an agent of change and somebody that can really do something about this, about what we are and about what we can do for ourselves and for the environment and for our country and for all the people that we love. So I think it's very beautiful and super empowering that you're here to help us develop this. Thank you.
Carlos. Well, I believe all here we are gathering as persons that are in the process of convincing ourselves that this method or process of designing is a method and a way to change things and maybe make them better.
Speaking back about values, I think for us, we're working in regards to regenerating, if you like that. I think it's commitment into making small facts, making them tangible. I mean, if we're supposed, I also want to say that we try to integrate each other organically. It means everyone that comes to join us, they participate in the way they feel appealing to participating. And I think that these tiny efforts can make tangible facts that give certainty into these big processes that also allow us to and get all the people.
I heard recently a phrase that said collaboration is a new competition. I think there's a lot of value in practicing collaboration because we're not used to it. Our mental model is trained, educated, and accustomed to always competing and seeing others as competition and not as an activating force. So I think it's a great opportunity for us to keep practicing collaborating and growing from feeding each other.
Gracias. I'm speaking Spanish. Bueno, la parte de que están diciendo, yo creo que es súper importante. Todos llegamos a un mismo planteamiento, como he dicho hace ratito. Pues todos pensamos en eso, en ese problema, en esa situación, todos llegamos a lo mismo. Creo que los problemas que estamos viviendo ahorita, cada quien dijo, no, pues el gobierno, no, pues este, no, pues el otro, no. Entonces, ¿qué pasa? Pues si no puedes contra el gobierno tú solo, pues, o si no puedes contra los grupos terroristas tú solo, y si no puedes contra la delincuencia, pues hay que unirnos a fuerzas. No hay otra. Necesitamos grupos, necesitamos que nosotros mismos nos unamos a esta parte. Y pues yo creo que el gran valor de esa parte de unirnos es más bien vencer nuestro propio egoísmo. Porque muchos trabajamos por nosotros, somos individualistas, tenemos esto y lo otro, aunque todos tenemos el mismo problema. La delincuencia está en todos lados. La situación de la parte de la contaminación está en todos lados. O sea, estamos viviendo en la misma ciudad, ¿no? O en las mismas ciudades. Yo lo vivo aquí en esta ciudad, yo vivo en Toluca, en Metepec, es un pequeño pueblito, que pues realmente no tenía delincuencia, ¿no? Pero pues se me acaba de tocar una situación también fuerte y esto me toca porque para poder lograr lo que yo he querido lograr he tenido que hacer un grupo y solamente así hemos podido superar y hacer lo que queremos. Entonces, bueno, si todos tenemos este problema, de alguna manera, pues lo único que podemos hacer es unirnos. Y la parte esencial es vencernos a nosotros mismos con el egoísmo, ¿no? O sea, es básico. Entonces, bueno, creo que este curso y esta parte de los cuestionamientos pues va para allá, ¿no? Tenemos todo, tenemos las tecnologías, podemos hacer sustentable cualquier cosa, tenemos gente que conoce de esto, ¿eh? Yo creo que habemos muchos valores aquí en México y podemos hacer que esto crezca como tal, ¿no? Nada más es ese detallito, ese detalle que nos está desuniendo o frenándonos como tal. Nada más. Gracias.
I just wanted to say that when you get together in a group and you want to achieve something, I think you have to leave a lot of things on the side and really listen to what everyone is saying in order to achieve that a goal or something that really matters. And so I think that to really be conscious of that and arriving to the place where you are leaving a lot of things on the side to achieve something great. That's what I wanted to say.
Okay. Hemos estado nosotros pasando por varias cuencas y en una es que nos sucede por rendimientos o tiendas ancla o algunas cosas, y en otros nos sucede porque etcétera, y en otros nos sucede porque el grupo, según nosotros, las capacidades o lo que sea, y en otros que no, es que quiero. Yo creo que tenemos que dejar de esperar que pasen las cosas y hacer que pasen las cosas. Y creo que ¿verdad?
Well, yesterday I received a message from Facebook. And it was really cool because it said that if you think that you're too small to make a difference, it's because you have never need to sleep in a room with a mosquito. And it makes all the sense. And I think the value is to the value of that and of the group is that the potential is there and it's huge, no matter if you see yourself so small. But in this way, in a group, what change when you work in a group is that you start to build interconnections and interdependence. And the responsibility of the things are not just in my back. It's in the back of all of us. Then we have more power and more energy and input to create something. And the value is that you can recognize yourself in a different way, and in a way in which you have all the potential, and not only see your huge limitation, better see your unlimited potential, because we are always trying to see about what is my limitation. And we don't do things as a culture in Mexico because we think that we can do that. No, because no, there's Alemania or Germany or Holland. No, yeah, that's see what culture they have. No, and we always are punishing ourselves because we can't. No, because we are looking about just our huge limitations. When you change, you can be a mosquito and make a terrific, a horrible night.
De verdad esta plática me está haciendo muy interesante porque lo más importante es ver, y como tú lo pusiste en el diagrama, el potencial que todos estamos hablando, y ese potencial nunca se debería de perder de vista. Es hasta donde yo quiero llegar. Y sí, tengo que empezar desde abajo, desde lo profundo, pero con cambios pequeños. Si yo quiero cambiar el mundo en un día, me voy a frustrar y no lo voy a lograr. Necesito ir poniendo metas a corto, largo, mediano y largo plazo. Y de esas metas, ¿cuáles son mis retos? ¿Qué paradigmas tengo que librar? La gente está acostumbrada a decir que se puede, que no se puede, y yo no puedo porque esto me lo van a tirar. Y eso no me corresponde, eso le corresponde al otro, ¿no? Entonces es asumir hasta dónde yo me voy a comprometer con ese cambio, qué voy a hacer por ese cambio, qué estoy dispuesta a sacrificar por ese cambio y qué esfuerzos voy a tener y qué recursos. Sobre eso, una vez que ya se tiene perfectamente consciente, tú puedes lograr esos pequeños cambios e ir incorporando gente. Cuando tú vas demostrando resultados, la gente se va sumando. Si no tienes estas metas, poco a poco, no vas a lograr nunca nada. Porque tus objetivos son tan grandes que tú solo no los vas a poder lograr. Tienes que tomar, así como tú pusiste los eslabones, es ir sumando poco a poco, pero sin perder de vista el objetivo. El mundo sí se puede cambiar, el pensamiento sí se puede cambiar, y todo está en tu mente.
I would like to sum a reflection here in the vision that all these ideas and all is in our mind, that I agree, but in 50%. Because I think, yeah, I thought the same some years ago, but I just passed through an experience that I was really asking myself for over a year, where did that vision ended? I didn't know where it ended. I hadn't I don't know if the strength or the formula to achieve it. But vision, I knew what Delphine was telling me some things that, oh, you have to change your vision. Yeah, I want to, and I know what your vision you are talking about, and I understand it, but it just don't make sense to me right now. And I think I would like to propose a question. I think this is a little inclined, the approach would be to the concept and the realization of experience. What would experience mean in this process? Because yeah, I agree, ideas are important, ambition is important, but experience also shapes us in a great way. And even if I have the idea in my mind, if I haven't experienced the right things, I wouldn't be able to achieve that vision. I think that's what my experience tells me, and I suggest this question. Wouldn't it be have vision, have experience, or even 30% vision, 30% experience, and 30% another thing we can't always control? I don't know, because I'm really convinced that it is not just vision.
Use of regenerative development, I think that is to be open, not to limit yourself in that kind of percentages, that because we're used to put on us those limits because we have to develop some habits and we have to develop some moods and some way of thinking and many things. What I think that opening our minds and our hearts and all the way that we can see things in the world and we can read the world and we can see like unknown patterns in some other societies and other places can give us the potential to see the message of the world that is over there and not only to seek for the best formula to regenerate something, because there's not always that answer. We have to be open.
You want this? No, I don't want to have to sit down. Okay, thank you. It's interesting, one of the themes that kept coming up in different ways in what was being said is worth really sort of underscoring. And if one is only working on potential and never working on making it exist, then nothing happens. Right? We call people like that dreamers, right? They never really get anywhere, they never really do anything. If we only work on existence and never work on potential, right, then life gets very gray, right? It gets kind of flat. It's being able to work on them both simultaneously. Working on the real world, making those small changes, those small steps, those small things that we can succeed in, but always understanding how that plays in the world of potential. So that I know that my small effort can have a huge ripple effect because of the way I'm thinking about it. So sometimes it's like going up in here and coming up with a totally new idea, but it doesn't make a difference if you don't bring it back down here and manifest it. And likewise, if you let everything fall apart down here, this doesn't really mean anything. Right? The world still has to work. We still have to live in it. Right? The point is to get these two together. So when we lay out, those 4 questions, we're not saying one question is better than the other. We're not saying potential is better than existence, or vice versa. We're saying if we want to have a whole life, if we want to make a change, if we want to really be able to contribute, we have to be able to understand wholes. That's really the message. How do I use these structures that we call frameworks to see things in a more whole way? How do I develop my ability to become more and more sophisticated about how I see wholeness? And so, Tim, would you like anything?
I just wanted to say that those insights are making us much more effective here.
Okay, so how are we doing for time?
15.
Time for energy?
Time for energy.
How are we doing for energy? Is it time to wrap? Okay. Well, thank you for your attention. Thank you for jumping in there and working. I love coming here and working here at Edo because people are so willing to really roll up their sleeves and work. It's not that way everywhere, by the way. So I'm very grateful to you. Thanks for coming out tonight. And we'll see some of you tomorrow. And you want to just say something about the workshop?
About the workshop, hay un estacionamiento a una cuadra de donde va a ser el taller. Es alrededor del 230 el estacionamiento. Amsterdam 230, no me sé la dirección exacta, pero está por ahí, entre Michoacán y Iztaccíhuatl. Por un lado. Por otro lado, a mí me gustaría decir que todo esto parece que es en el futuro y que lo vamos a hacer, y a mí me gustaría decir que está pasando ahorita entre ustedes. Cuidado. Y mucho de lo que ha donde hemos estado canalizando los últimos esfuerzos con un gran grupo, ahí con Paco, Perla, Gaby, Pablo, Roses, Delfín, Stefano, etcétera, muchísima gente. Estamos organizando una ocupa a un río, que es el río La Piedad, pero en forma de picnic. Entonces los invitamos el domingo, pacífico, no alcohol, no papalotes, no pelotas, nada que se pueda caer el viaducto. Nos vamos a ver en Viaducto Insurgentes a las 11:30 de la mañana el domingo para un convivio pacífico, buena onda. Hay quiniela, a ver cuánta gente llega. Unos dicen que 500 y unos dicen que 300. Hay mucha gente sumada, desde bicitecas, mujeres en bici, rodada diversa, restaurantes, van a llegar a comida. Gaby ha diseñado una extraordinaria intervención de una siembra para dejar una huella de algo vivo en sitio. ¿Qué más, Paco? ¿Qué me falta, Paco?
Que va a haber mucha, que vaya educación.
¿Pero en qué parte de Ah,
Va a haber, si van a llevar música acústica. Más información del evento está en picnicenelrio.org. Los invitamos a sumarse. Lleven sus canastas de picnic. picnicenelrio.org. Trajes de baño y bikinis muy bonitos.
No pelotas, no se caiga el adulto, nada que pueda quererse.
Pues, thank you very much, Ben, team. Gracias a todos, pues estamos con una semana muy intensa, tanto los que estamos en el taller como los que estamos en el diplomado. Así es de que de aquí al domingo ahora vamos a ir de traje de baño al río, lleven balsa y todo, ¿no? Ok, cualquier duda, cualquier cuestión que tengan, pregúntenos ahorita o Carlos o Gilda les estarán dando información. Gracias, que descansen.